We do have more breaking news. President Trump announcing a significant move involving Israel. He tweeted just moments ago, quote, "After 52 years, it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is of critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability." Let's go live now to Michelle Kaczynski. She is at the State Department following this. Tell us why this is so significant, especially ahead of this visit.
Hi, Brianna. Right. Now, this is not an internationally recognized sovereignty over the Golan Heights. In fact, just the opposite. Israel seized this land from Syria in the Six-Day War in 1967. It's been seen by the United States for years as occupation. And in documents and in policy statements, the U.S. would recognize that. So we started to see indications that this could change in a number of ways. Recently, for the first time, the U.S. voted against a UN resolution condemning Israel's occupation of these lands. So we saw the opposition to it there. And then just days ago, in a State Department report on human rights, for the first time, instead of calling it occupied, the U.S. called this land Israeli controlled. So we've been asking the State Department ever since then, what does this mean exactly? And the State Department has played pretty coy with it. It's as if they didn't want to draw attention to it. And when asked, they wouldn't give any detail on it. I mean, just today, Secretary of State Pompeo, who is traveling in Israel, today he's in Jerusalem, he was asked by reporters repeatedly, what does this mean for U.S. policy? Can you tell us what the U.S. policy is? He refused to answer. And now we see this massive change by the president via tweet, Brianna.
Not unusual, but still significant. Michelle Kaczynski at the State Department, thank you. And I want to bring in former Defense Secretary, former CIA Director, and White House Chief of Staff as well, Leon Panetta, who is with us from Monterey, California. Sir, this is our breaking news here. The president recognizing the Golan Heights. What is your reaction to this?
Well, it raises a lot of concern because he's tweeting out another policy that obviously has not been worked out with our international partners, has not been worked through the United Nations in any way, and frankly gives up one of the chips that everyone thought would be part of a Middle East peace agreement deal. And the problem is that it's going to create real problems with our Arab partners in that part of the world. It isn't that Israel doesn't control the Golan Heights, they do. The real question is whether or not recognizing that the Golan Heights are now part of Israel can be accomplished without working with our international partners and international law.
What do you see a role here when it comes to the re-election bid of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it's hard not to put two and two together. The president has made clear his support for Netanyahu. Netanyahu asked that this be done a few days ago. So 2 and 2 equals 4. And I think there's no question that this is part of President Trump's support for Netanyahu in that election.
All right, Secretary, if you can stay with me, we have much more ahead to talk with you about. I do want to talk now about this Washington waiting game.
I speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu all the time. We're declining to meet with him. I'm declining to meet with him simply because our general policy is we don't meet with any world leader 2 weeks before their election. I think that's inappropriate.
That was President Obama back in 2015 when he refused to grant Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu a pre-election visit. But the Trump White House doesn't have the same reservations, announcing that Netanyahu will visit President Trump in Washington and have dinner at the White House next week, just before his April 9th election. Joining me now is NBC's chief foreign affairs correspondent and the anchor of this program, Andrea Mitchell from Jerusalem. Andrea, this is a pretty notable show of support from the Trump administration for the Israeli prime minister, who is, of course, under threat of indictment in addition to being up for re-election.
He is indeed, and it is unusual, not unprecedented. There have been times when there is certainly a show of support from other presidents to an Israeli prime minister under election. Very rare, though, and never a visit this close to an election. That's what's so unusual about it. As President Obama said, and he had a notably frosty relationship with Netanyahu over policy, over the expansion of Israeli settlements into Palestinian areas. That has all changed under Donald Trump. President Trump has a vested interest in his strongest ally, Benjamin Netanyahu, being reelected. They share a mutual hatred, really, of Iran and disputes with the Iranian leadership, calling the Iranian leaders aggressive, dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Again today, Mike Pompeo saying that. Asked about what he is going to say tomorrow when he goes to Lebanon in an unusual visit, he's going to say, he said, that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Period. End of story. Hezbollah are among the elected leaders in the Lebanese parliament. So he is really going to be confrontational, and he's also threatening tougher sanctions against Iran. But today was really notable because Pompeo became the highest level U.S. official to go to the holy place here for Jews, for Israel, the Western Wall, to put a prayer into the wall, and doing it alongside Benjamin Netanyahu. President Trump was here in 2017 and did not do that with Netanyahu. So this was really a sign of solidarity and a signal of support for Israel's claims to sovereignty over the Old City, despite the Palestinian equal claims to their share of it, which was to be negotiated under decades of U.S. policy. Now there are no conversations with the Palestinians, haven't been since the U.S. moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Israel, recognizing Jerusalem here, where I sit in the Old City, as the capital of Israel, which other presidents in both parties have not done. Pompeo also visited the old consulate here, which is now being expanded, rebuilt into the new embassy, as it's now been officially moved. There have been no talks with the Palestinians since, and none certainly on this trip. He also went to a synagogue built in the Roman tunnels that are actually under the Muslim quarter here of the Old City. And again, there a prayer was said by the rabbi for President Trump. And then you're going to have the extraordinary visit only 2 weeks before the Israeli election, with this embattled Israeli leader getting a big boost of support from the administration, going to the White House, having a dinner there, and meetings next week with President Trump. Casey?
And Andrea, no Democratic presidential candidate has committed yet to attending the AIPAC conference here coming up next week, and there are liberal groups calling for a boycott. Does that signal to you any sort of political shift around this?
I think there is a shift. Netanyahu has been a polarizing influence among American Jews, among lobbying groups, interest groups. You've got the J Street group and others who are more liberal and are strongly against his policies. And most recently, he aligned himself with some really right-wing, anti-Arab, well-known groups here that are disciples of Meir Kahan, the banned, outlawed radical leader, a rabbi from Brooklyn who was an elected official here, returned and was later assassinated in New York City. Back in the 80s, he was actually a member of parliament here. And he was so radical, and his disciples are now new allies of Netanyahu's, trying to shore up his election by reassuring his base and really copying a lot of Donald Trump's very populist, base-pleasing policies, also talking about the fake media, the fake news. He's been very aggressive. He's included Donald Trump in billboards, in his campaign ads. They could not be closer, more closely aligned. And I think you're going to see a lot more, including hints that Netanyahu here this week has been pressing for the U.S. to recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, which were taken by Israel after the end of the Six-Day War in 1967 from Syria. Very important strategically and militarily and also politically. That's where Hezbollah has been firing rockets against northern Israel for decades and decades. And to take part of the Golan Heights and legitimize it in the U.S. terms, that could also come next week at the AIPAC conference. And that's another reason why some of the liberal, more progressive Democrats are reluctant to be identified with that pro-Israel lobbying group.
The indefatigable Andrea Mitchell on the beat. Thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, Casey. Great to see you.
You too. Coming up.